It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives. In the summer of 2000, in a town that prided itself on quiet streets and close-knit families, a young couple exchanged vows, danced under fairy lights, and disappeared into a honeymoon suite. By dawn, one of them would be dead. In this episode on Twisted Case File, we explore the case that shocked the nation, piecing together evidence, testimony, and haunting memories from that fateful wedding night. Don't forget to like, share with friends, and also subscribe. They were not celebrities. They were not household names. They were simply two young adults, deeply in love, stepping into marriage at the turn of a new century. To friends and family, their union seemed almost storybook. But a closer look reveals a more complicated story. A relationship filled with highs and lows, dreams and disappointments, and tensions that few outsiders recognized. They met in their junior year of college. He was charming, she was ambitious. Everyone thought they balanced each other out. But sometimes we'd see them argue, and it would get intense. She confided in me a few times. Nothing specific, just that wedding planning was stressful, and that they had some disagreements about money, about where they'd live. You know, normal stuff. Or so I thought. On the morning of the wedding, guests recalled seeing a nervous but radiant bride. The groom seemed distracted but affectionate. As the ceremony began, no one could have predicted the dark turn the night would take. The reception that followed was lively. Music, dancing, laughter, all captured on shaky camcorder footage now stored as evidence. Guests toasted the couple's future, unaware that within hours tragedy would strike. Just after 10 o'clock that evening, they checked into a nearby hotel known for its romantic honeymoon suites. It was a short drive from the venue, chosen for convenience and privacy. Hotel staff remember a polite couple, still in their wedding attire, carrying small overnight bags. They looked happy. Tired, but happy. I congratulated them, gave them their keycard. Nothing seemed off. Nothing at all. Security footage confirms their arrival. The pair walked down the hallway, laughing softly, the bride holding her bouquet like a trophy. That image would later become one of the last of her alive. What happened between the closing of that door and the 911 call that came hours later remains the subject of speculation, forensic analysis, and legal debate. At 10:22 p.m., the newlyweds entered their honeymoon suite. By all appearances, the night was winding down. But somewhere between the champagne toasts and the soft closing of the hotel door, something changed. Investigators would later reconstruct a rough timeline from phone records, keycard logs, and the faint signatures of security cameras. Hours passed in that suite with no sign of trouble until a call at 3:14 a.m. jolted the local emergency dispatch center. "She's not breathing. Please send someone." First responders arrived within 7 minutes. What they found inside the honeymoon suite would haunt them for years. The bride lay unresponsive, with signs of trauma inconsistent with a simple medical emergency. The groom appeared distraught, yet his story would soon draw suspicion. We were told it was a possible heart attack or allergic reaction. When we got there, it was clear something violent had happened. Crime scene technicians photographed the room. Broken glass, a torn veil, and faint traces of blood on the carpet. They collected samples, documented injuries, and secured the area as a potential homicide scene. The groom was questioned on the spot. His initial statement painted the night as a sudden medical catastrophe, but inconsistencies in his timeline soon emerged. He said they'd gone to bed around midnight and that he woke up to find her unresponsive. But the room told a different story. There were signs of a struggle, and neighbors had heard muffled arguments. Detectives also noticed the hotel keycard log. The room door opened twice between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m., suggesting someone left and returned. Security cameras did not clearly capture who it was. Toxicology and autopsy reports would later reveal injuries consistent with blunt force trauma and signs of prolonged struggle, far from the sudden collapse described by the surviving spouse. The injuries were not typical of a fall or seizure. There were defensive wounds. This was a violent encounter. Friends and family were stunned. Hours earlier, they had watched a fairy tale wedding. Now the bride was gone, and the groom was under a cloud of suspicion. Investigators began to dig deeper, unearthing a pattern of tension and possible motives. The wedding night murder of 2000 was no longer just a tragedy. It was a case. As the investigation unfolded, shocking revelations would emerge about the couple's relationship, financial pressures, and a possible plan that began long before the wedding day. Within hours of the incident, the case had shifted from a medical emergency to a homicide investigation. Detectives began piecing together the newlyweds' lives, searching for clues about what went so terribly wrong on their wedding night. Every surface of the honeymoon suite was processed. Glasses, door handles, luggage. Investigators collected DNA, fingerprints, and even fibers from torn clothing. These items were sent to the state crime lab for rush analysis. Our priority was to secure the scene, separate witnesses, and preserve every scrap of evidence. Cases like this are built on details, not assumptions. Investigators used surveillance footage, keycard data, and phone records to reconstruct the night. They discovered that at least one phone call was made from the room at 1:20 a.m., a call the groom initially failed to mention. We traced a short outgoing call to a local number. We're not disclosing who was on the other end, but it became a crucial piece of the puzzle. As in many homicide cases, investigators looked at potential motives. Financial records revealed life insurance policies and joint accounts opened shortly before the wedding. Friends mentioned previous arguments about money, relocation, and control. She told me she felt pressured to sign some paperwork right before the wedding. She brushed it off as, quote, normal married life stuff. Detectives also learned of previous domestic incidents that had not been reported to police but had been confided to close friends. These revelations painted a darker picture of the relationship. The state crime lab's findings were critical. DNA under the bride's fingernails matched the groom. Blood spatter analysis indicated a struggle near the bed, not a fall or collapse as originally claimed. The physical evidence was consistent with a prolonged altercation. We could see attempts to defend, to push away. It contradicted the statement we'd been given. The case quickly captured public attention. A young bride dead on her wedding night was a story that spread far beyond the town's borders. Newspapers ran sensational headlines, and television stations sent crews to cover each new development. It had all the elements: romance, tragedy, mystery. People couldn't look away. As evidence mounted, prosecutors began preparing charges. They had forensic data, inconsistencies in statements, and possible financial motives. But they still faced the challenge of proving premeditation versus a sudden violent act. We had to show the jury not just that he caused her death, but that he intended to. That's a much higher bar. The trial that followed would reveal even more, a courtroom battle where each side told a different story of what happened on that wedding night. By spring of 2001, less than a year after the tragedy, the case known as the Wedding Night Murder went to trial. The courthouse was packed. Family members filled the first rows, reporters filled the back. Prosecutors opened with a stark narrative. A groom driven by control and financial gain killed his bride on their wedding night. The defense countered with a very different story, that this was a tragic accident, not a murder. The tension was palpable. People leaned forward as each attorney spoke, trying to reconcile the smiling wedding photos with the autopsy reports. The state called 28 witnesses, including first responders, crime scene technicians, and friends of the bride. They introduced evidence of defensive wounds, keycard data, and the unexplained phone call at 1:20 a.m. We argued that the defendant had planned this, that the life insurance policy, the keycard evidence, and the bruises all pointed to a deliberate act. They also played the 911 call for the jury, pointing out discrepancies between the defendant's statements that night and later interviews with police. The defense painted a different picture. They said the couple had been drinking heavily, that an argument turned into a fall, and that the injuries were accidental. They portrayed their client as a devastated husband, not a killer. This was a tragedy, not a crime. Accidents happen, even on wedding nights. They tried to undermine the prosecution's timeline, suggesting that keycard data could be inaccurate, and that the phone call was to order room service, not to plot a crime. For weeks, the jury listened to competing narratives. They saw wedding photos alongside autopsy charts, heard friends describe romance and rage in equal measure, and tried to piece together the truth. It was overwhelming. You wanted to believe it was an accident, but the evidence, it just kept stacking up. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 days. They requested to review the keycard records, the 911 call transcript, and the autopsy photos. On the 4th day, the jury returned with a verdict. The room was silent. You could hear the defendant's mother praying under her breath. He was found guilty of second-degree murder. The court sentenced him to a lengthy prison term. The bride's family wept. The defendant stared ahead, expressionless. The verdict brought a measure of closure, but also deepened the tragedy. 2 families were shattered, one by loss, the other by incarceration. For the small town, the case became a cautionary tale about hidden violence. We'll never get her back. But at least the truth came out. Even after the trial ended, the story of the wedding night murder continued to echo. In the years that followed, advocates and loved ones turned their grief into a call for awareness. When the cameras left and the courtroom emptied, the consequences of that wedding night lingered. 2 families struggled with loss and shame. A community that had once celebrated a marriage was left to reconcile with a murder. For the victim's family, the verdict was not a victory but a small step toward closure. For the defendant's relatives, it was the beginning of a long separation, visits through glass, and a name forever linked to tragedy. We never wanted this. We wanted her to be happy. Now all we have are pictures and memories. He made a terrible choice. We lost her. And in many ways, we lost him too. The case sparked difficult conversations in the community about domestic violence, warning signs, and the illusion of the, quote, perfect couple. Churches and civic groups began holding workshops on healthy relationships. People didn't want to believe something like this could happen here. But it did, and it forced us to talk about what we'd ignored. Years later, the wedding night murder of 2000 became the subject of articles, television specials, and online debates. Each retelling attempted to understand how a celebration turned into a crime scene. It's a story that still resonates because it's about trust, love, and betrayal, themes everyone recognizes. Experts point out that tragedies like this are rarely without warning. Friends, family, and even strangers can play a role in noticing red flags and offering support. It's uncomfortable to ask someone if they're safe, but it can save a life. Today, the hotel has been renovated. New guests check in unaware of its history. But for those who lived through it, the events of that night are impossible to forget. I've worked dozens of cases, but this one stays with me. A wedding should be a beginning. This was an ending. The wedding night murder of 2000 remains a haunting reminder that appearances can mask hidden pain. It is also a call to action. If you or someone you know is in danger, resources are available. No one should suffer in silence. Help is out there. And while justice may come after the fact, prevention can begin today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share with friends, and also subscribe.